Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the essays on the Gita with our beloved Ranga. Today is the second day of September 2022, and we welcome all of you. Also tomorrow at 6 o'clock, there will be the synthesis of yoga, again with Ranga. We're beginning on page 6 with the line, "In the Gita there is very little that is merely local or temporal."
Before we read the para, just to remind you what Sri Aurobindo's attitude is towards the Gita. He says that there are basically two things. There is the truth, eternal, absolute truth, which is unchanging at the highest level. These truths, when they get manifested in the lower planes of consciousness, in our matter, life and mind, or individually, the body, the vital and the mind, they get distorted and limited. So all Shastras, since they use words which are necessarily limited, are only partial expressions of the eternal truths. So, we will approach the Gita also in that way. It is one of the finest scriptures, but we will not say and we will not insist that that is the only truth. There are other truths also which are partial, and we shall keep ourselves open and broad-minded. That's the approach that he has taken. Then he says that there are eternal truths which are ineffable, you can't put into words. And there are truths which are applicable temporarily in the physical world. They are subject to time and space. Okay? So what is true 100 years ago may not be true today. So this is, we have to understand that there are temporal truths and there are eternal truths. So now we will, with this background, we will read what he is saying in this paragraph that we have to read today.
So, one question before we continue. These temporal truths, are they evolving truths?
Yes, they evolve into the next level, into the next level, into the next level. Exactly. We are now in the world, we are now in the stage where this racism and all this which was considered quite okay, slavery was considered quite okay for a long time. These are inferior human beings and they are fit only for labor. But that now the ideas are changing entirely, and we say that no, all men are created equal and they also have the right to, although we admit that all men are created equal. In America, for instance, the Constitution believes on that. All men are created equal. Yet the slavery was there for a very long time until it got abolished by one of the finest people that America has produced, Abraham Lincoln. So, there is an evolution, of course, from a lower level to a higher level. In India also, we have the same problem. The caste system is very, very deep truth there is in the caste system. But it has been completely misunderstood and misapplied in the physical world. The Shudras are treated in a very bad way, which is absolutely not justified at all. Okay? So, this is there in every religion and in every, because the universal truth is absolute truth at the highest level, inexpressible, and temporal truths, they get distorted and partial truths they become. So, there is an evolution, certainly. Okay? So what about the Gita? Is there something there which are limited expressions of truth? That's what we are going to read today. Okay? So, I read the para and then we'll come back to it if it is found to be necessary. In the Gita, there is very little that is merely local or temporal, and its spirit is so large, profound, and universal that even this little can easily be universalized without the sense of the teaching suffering any diminution or violation. Rather, by giving an ampler scope to it, than belong to the country and epoch, the teaching gains in depth, truth, and power. Often, indeed, the Gita itself suggests the wider scope that can, in this way, be given to an idea in itself local or limited. Thus, it dwells on the ancient Indian system and idea of sacrifice as an interchange between gods and men, a system and idea which have long been practically obsolete in India itself and are no longer real to the general human mind. But we find here a sense so entirely subtle, figurative, and symbolic given to the word sacrifice, and the conception of the gods is so little local or mythological, so entirely cosmic and philosophical, that we can easily accept both as expressive of a practical fact of psychology and general law of nature, and so apply them to the modern conceptions of interchange between life and life, and of ethical sacrifice and self-giving, as to widen and deepen these and cast over them a more spiritual aspect and the light of a profounder and more far-reaching truth. Equally, the idea of action, according to the Shastra, the fourfold order of society, the allusion to the relative position of the four orders or the comparative spiritual disabilities of Shudras and women, seem at first sight local and temporal, and if they are too much pressed in their literal sense, narrow so much at least of the teaching, deprive it of its universality and spiritual depth, and limit its validity for mankind at large. But if we look behind to the spirit and sense, and not at the local name and temporal institution, we see that here too the sense is deep and true, and the spirit philosophical, spiritual, and universal. By Shastra, we perceive that the Gita means the law imposed on itself by humanity as a substitute for the purely egoistic action of the natural unregenerate man, and a control on his tendency to seek in the satisfaction of his desire the standard and aim of his life. We see too that the fourfold order of society is merely the concrete form of a spiritual truth which is itself independent of the form. It rests on the conception of right works as a rightly ordered expression of the nature of the individual being through whom the work is done. That nature assigning him his line and scope in life according to his inborn quality and his self-expressive function. Since this is the spirit in which the Gita advances its most local and particular instances, we are justified in pursuing always the same principle and looking always for the deeper general truth, which is sure to underlie whatever seems at first sight merely local and of the time. For we shall find always that the deeper truth and principle is implied in the grain of the thought, even when it is not expressly stated in its language. So, a
Complex,
huge
long
para
sentences.
with a lot of subtle truths in it.
Yes.
So we will discuss it. So, as we began, there are eternal truths, and there are its expressions in the physical world are always limited and partial. There is always an element of truth in these, but it's only an element, and it can easily be misinterpreted. So Srimda is saying that in the Gita, there are, and he has given you examples, He has given you 2 or 3 examples. One is sacrifice, and the other is the position of the Shudra and the women in society. And we will see how these were acceptable at one time, but they are not acceptable now. The whole thing has changed. Okay? So this is what we are going to read. So, I read each sentence and we'll look at it carefully. In the Gita, there is very little that is merely local or temporal, and its spirit is so large, profound, and universal that even this little can easily be universalized without the sense of the teaching suffering any diminution or violation. Okay? So, even if it is temporal, because for instance, the concept of the 4 orders of society, the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and the Shudra, is only in India. It's not their idea. It's not there. In some form or other, it is there in other countries, practiced, but not as a theory. Okay. For instance, in every society, there is the aristocratic people, and there are those who are the menial servants. You call them the blue collar and the white collar. Okay. The white collar are the ones who are the aristocrats, and the blue collar are the ones working at the ground level. So this idea is there everywhere, but it has been codified and given a proper theoretical explanation in this way. We'll look at that. Okay, so even this little can easily be universalized without the sense of the teaching suffering any diminution or violation. Rather, by giving an ampler scope, it is to it than belong to the country and epoch. There you are. So the fourfold order of society is essentially true everywhere. That's what Sundar is saying, and we shall look at that. Okay, so the teaching gains in depth, truth, and power. Often, the Gita itself suggests the wider scope that can in this way be given to an idea in itself local and limited. So even when there is something which is local and limited, you can enlarge it and look behind the form and see the truth that is there. It's interesting, when we come to that, there was once a delegation of Japanese people. They were the undertakers, those who undertake the work of disposing of dead bodies. Okay, they had come to Chennai, and they said that they are ill-treated in Japan. So again, they are the equivalent of Shudras there. So today it may be different, but what I'm talking about 50 years ago, a delegation did come and they speak of that. So my point is, it is there everywhere. But maybe practiced, but not put into a philosophic context. Okay? So, often indeed, the Gita itself suggests the wider scope that can in this way be given to an idea in itself local and or limited. Thus, the first example, thus it dwells on the ancient Indian system and idea of sacrifice as an interchange between gods and men, a system and idea which have long been practically obsolete in India itself and are no longer real to the general human mind. But we find here a sense so entirely subtle, figurative, and symbolic given to the word sacrifice, and the conception of the gods is so little local or mythological, so entirely cosmic and philosophical, that we can easily accept both as expressive of a practical fact of psychology and a general law of nature, and so apply them to the modern conceptions of interchange between life and of ethical sacrifice and self-giving, as to widen and deepen these and cast over them a more spiritual aspect and the light of a profounder and more far-reaching truth. So, it's worth discussing what he means by sacrifice. So we'll spend a little time on this. In the synthesis, the sacrifice, yajna, which is mentioned in the Gita, Swamdeva has gone to great details to apply the principle of sacrifice and yajna to Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. He has gone into great detail and he applies the concept of sacrifice. Now what is this question of sacrifice? He has given you already a little bit of a hint. Okay. Today, when you speak of yajna or sacrifice, you feel that you have built an altar and there is a fire and you are pouring ghee into it and chanting mantras. Okay. But the real truth is you are appealing to the psychological or spiritual or even supramental powers, divine powers. You are interacting with them. But that idea has gone, and Srimad explains in great detail in the synthesis. In one para, he refers to the Gita and then he explains what it is. The fact is that there has to be an interchange in the physical world. You can't get anything by only taking. You have to give to receive. It is something so fundamentally simple that you go into a shop, if you want to buy something, you have to give money and you get it back. This is at the lowest level. So, this can be applied slowly. If you want something from God, you have to give Him something. So, there is an interchange. The concept of interchange is there between gods and men. So, when the divine is creating the universe, He is creating a connection between everything. Even science admits that everything is connected. There is a whole connection. In nature also we have seen that. There is a connection between trees and animals and everything, and even the plants themselves also. Different species of plants are interacting with each other. So there is constantly an interaction. The idea is that if you do something egoistically, you are not following the principle of the sacrifice. So you have to always give to receive. So, but this is not in the sense of a commercial transaction. It has to be spontaneous. The more you give, the more you will receive. There has to be an interchange. This is the basic idea of sacrifice. And when the Gita, there is a shloka, we'll come to that, when we come to that we'll discuss it. The world has been created and men are there, and the divine creates human beings and says, have contact with the gods, and with the interaction you grow all together with the interaction. This is the idea of sacrifice. Sacrifice is not parting with something precious to you and feeling the loss. That's what we normally understand by sacrifice. That, I have a very good watch, but in a moment of mad generosity, I have given away my watch to somebody and afterwards I regret. That's not the meaning of the word sacrifice. Sacrifice is a happy giving and a receiving in exchange. So this is the idea given to you.
And this idea of he sacrificed everything for his family.
Yes. In fact, in the Hound of Heaven, that's it.
Yes.
All that you think I have taken away from you, I have kept for you in heaven. So the more you give to the divine, the more you receive. So that's the idea of the sacrifice. Okay? So this is what Srimad is referring to. So it is, even today, he is saying that modern conceptions of interchange between life and life. In fact, we recognize now, all over the world, that even if I have politically an enemy, let's have trade. It will lead you to a good relationship. Okay, there is something, that's why USA is interacting with China. They have a trade relation. And trade means you will have a contact, you will understand each other better. So this is the lowest form of sacrifice. But at the higher level, it can be moral, it can be even spiritual. So that's the idea of sacrifice. Okay, so that is one idea that he has said, that you must not think of it as pouring ghee into a fire and thinking that that's a very temporal thing. In other countries, there may be the concept, but not in this way. So it's not something temporal at all. It is something, a deep spiritual truth is there behind.
Nor is it something automatic and just doing something for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
This we see very often.
But also it has not to be done in a commercial spirit. oh, the more I give, the more I will get. No, it should not be like that at all. You give spontaneously and you will get the benefit. Okay. So, this is what Srimad is saying. Look at the words. Practical fact of psychology. Okay. Even in the physical world, it is something so grossly, even if you misinterpret, okay? It's a very strange thing, but you must not misunderstand. The more I make phone calls, the more I get phone calls. It's as simple as that. The more I give gifts to people, the more on my own birthday I will get gifts. So these are the grossest level. But this is the subtle truth behind it. So if they use the word practical fact of psychology.
Yes.
Okay? So, and general law of nature. In fact, in America they say, there is no free lunch.
Yeah.
There is no free lunch. You have to pay for it in some form or other. So, okay? So that's the basic idea of sacrifice. But you should not apply it only at the grossest level. It's a very, very subtle truth. So the more you give to the divine, the more you will get. And this giving also is something interesting. When you are giving something, you are making a connection between the two. You are opening your doors. And if you open your doors, he can come in. The divine is not going to knock on your door. He will wait for you to open the door for him. So the more you connect and open the door, he will come in. The less you open the door, the less he will come in. This is the idea of sacrifice. Connectedness. Okay? So, and he is telling you very clearly the gradations. Practical fact of psychology, number 1. General law of nature, number 2. Then ethical sacrifice. Even at the moral level. Yeah.
Explain that a little bit. Ethical sacrifice.
So, ethical sacrifice also, the idea of philanthropy, the idea of altruism, humanitarianism, that's what he's referring to. Okay? In fact, this also was the idea at one time it was there. In America we had the Peace Corps.
Yes.
Okay? And they used to go out to the countries, not expecting anything in particular, but doing the work. So that's a form of altruism and philanthropy. In France also you have something, wherever there are epidemics or something, they had an organization called Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. So this is the sort of thing that he is referring to, ethical. But it's not only practical and ethical and law of nature, but it's also self-giving. It is also spiritual. So there's a whole gradation of truths which he is referring to when you speak of sacrifice. Okay, so you can see how deep it is. Now he comes to the fourfold order of society, the four caste system. Now we come to the next idea, which he is saying could be interpreted as temporal and limited to time and country. Okay. Equally, the idea of action according to the Shastra. First of all, he's talking of the Shastra. The fourfold order of society, the allusion to the relative position of the four orders or the comparative spiritual disabilities of Shudras and women seem at first sight local and temporal. And if they are too much pressed in their literal sense, narrow so much at least of the teaching, deprive it of its universality and spiritual depth, and limit its validity for mankind in general. So, it's interesting if you see the word narrow, okay? It's usually an adjective. But he is using it here as a verb. Look carefully. Okay?
Yes.
And narrow it down. So you are narrowing it down. Narrow so much at least of the teaching. Okay? So when you read Srimad, you have to see carefully. In Savitri's problem is there all the time. He is using nouns as adjectives, adjectives as sometimes free grammatical freedom.
Very true.
Okay? It's not wrong, but he can use it in that way. So all right. So we'll look at that, what he's saying. But if we look behind to the spirit and sense and not at the local name and temporal institution, we see that here too the sense is deep and true, and the spirit philosophical, spiritual, and universal. Okay? So, we'll further read and then we'll look at the idea of what is the real idea behind the fourfold order of society. By Shastra, we perceive that the Gita means the law imposed on itself by humanity as a substitute for the purely egoistic action of the natural unregenerate man, and a control on his tendency to seek in the satisfaction of his desire the standard and aim of his life. In the beginning, man is egoistic and is seeking only for his own satisfaction. But then the Shastra tells you that you can't do that. So the Shastra is exactly that. That's a function that it performs. We see too that the fourfold order of society is merely the concrete form of a spiritual truth which is itself independent of the form. By the way, I'll go a little more into the Shastra. Okay? We always think of the Shastra as something fixed. But that's not true. That's what Srimad is pointing out. It seems to be the Shastras are there, we have all the Shastras and they are eternal truths. They are not eternal truths. I'll give you two instances of what happened. There is the Ramakrishna. Okay? One day he was expounding his experiences and all that, and someone told him, had the temerity and the foolishness to tell him that what you are saying, the Vedanta does not say that. Okay? So, what was Ramakrishna's reaction? He says, I spit upon your Vedanta. So, that's it. The Vedanta is, however great it is, it's an expression, limited expression in words of a truth which is ineffable. That's one thing. The other example is very interesting also of Vivekananda. After Ramakrishna's passing away, Vivekananda was traveling all over India. He was going all over India without any money, without anything. Okay? And when he came to Madras, he was so powerful and so learned that people used to give him automatically respect, although he was almost dressed like a beggar. Okay? So he was one day he was expounding in Chennai, at that time it was called Madras. He was expounding a truth. And again someone challenged him. Okay? And said, what you are saying, the Shastra does not say. That's why I'm referring to the Shastra. The Shastra does not say what you are saying. So, Vivekananda's reply, what was it? But I, Vivekananda, say it. And Sri Aurobindo says, this is not egoism. This is not arrogance. This is standing for the truth. So, two examples of how Shastra can be completely misunderstood, and you think that it is the ultimate truth. It is not. You have to understand it in the context, and it's everything in the physical world, however great the Shastra, it's an evolving thing.
Would this apply in the West to the 10 Commandments?
Oh, that's the lowest level. The 10 Commandments are the lowest level. Okay? Yeah, it applies to the greatest truths. That's what he's saying.
Yes.
Okay? So, that's a Shastra. But now we come to the fourfold order of society. That's very interesting, and we'll look at what he's saying. We see too that the fourfold order of society is merely the concrete form of a spiritual truth, which is itself independent of the form. Okay? What are the forms? The Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras. That's the outer form. But there is a truth to it, psychological truth. We'll see what it is. It rests on the conception of right works as a rightly ordered expression of the nature of the individual being through whom the work is done. That nature assigning him his line and scope in life according to his inborn quality and his self-expressive function. So, we'll have a look at this. In fact, the whole idea rests on the Swadharma, Swabhava and Swadharma. That's a basic concept which is discussed in the Gita. Swabhava and Swadharma. What is Swabhava? Swabhava, your own nature. That is Swabhava. But to which does it belong? Does it belong to your body, mind, life? To your outer nature? That's what we would say. Oh, this man is very generous. Oh, this man is very calm and cool. That is not the Swabhava that the Gita is speaking of. When the divine creates souls, he creates souls infinitely. So every soul that is there, he creates in a different way. Because why should he create everybody in the same way? He doesn't. He creates each one a different way. And each one is given a character of the nature. The spiritual nature is different. Look at Mother and Srimad. Both are divine. Mother into music and Srimad into literature. So this is the nature of each soul is different. That is the Swabhava. Okay? Not the outer nature. This you have to very carefully have to understand. Now, when that Swabhava comes down, you are ignorant of yourself. I remember one child telling me that we were reading Swabhava and Swadharma, and he says, I am thinking of going into architecture, but I am not sure whether that is my nature. He was interpreting as though it's the outer nature. So, he says he doesn't know. And no one knows their Swabhava unless you realize your soul. If you realize your soul, you know what your nature is. Okay? So, when that is done, the nature given to souls can be infinite. But you can't speak of infinite qualities, so you have to narrow them down to a certain general truths. So the general truths are this, that a man's function is towards knowledge. Okay? So he is a Brahmin. Someone else is towards courage and force. That is the Kshatriya. The other is the one who is interested in producing wealth, splendor, beauty. That's a Vaishya. And the other is the loyalty, service to others, generosity. That's a Shudra. So, all the different souls that you see can be a combination of any of these. Nobody is a perfect knowledge man, nobody is a perfect Kshatriya, there's always a combination of all these. This is the truth. That is the being discussed. But because the Shudra is doing the most menial of jobs, okay, he is looked down upon, which is a total misinterpretation of the Shastra. So this is what Srimad is saying. Okay? So very interesting. So we see too that the fourfold order of society is merely the concrete form of a spiritual truth which is itself independent of the form. The spiritual truth of the Varna is not the Brahmin, Kshatriya, the Vaishya and the Shudra. No, that's only the outer form. And that outer form is completely misunderstood. Okay? So, note the word, nature assigning him his line and scope in life according to his inborn quality and his self-expressive function. Since this is the spirit in which the Gita advances its most local and particular instances, we are justified in pursuing always the same principle and looking always for the deeper general truth which is sure to underlie whatever seems at first sight merely local and of the time, temporal. For we shall find always that the deeper truth and principle is implied in the grain of the thought, even when it is not expressly stated in its language. Now, we have not discussed the Shudras. Shudras we have discussed, but not the women. Okay? But see what happens throughout history, because women were less strong in physical strength. They have been always put down upon and made to limit their activities to the kitchen. Okay? So, that was an idea which was quite acceptable for a long time. Not anymore. Nowadays, they are revolting and you have to recognize that everybody. But is there a truth behind that? there is a truth. But that truth should not be misinterpreted. The truth is that of Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is nature at the lowest level. Okay? And Purusha is the consciousness. It's a question of, it's not a gradation of up and down. It's a different function. Okay? It's a knowledge aspect is the Purusha, and the work power aspect is the Shakti, the Prakriti. That's the truth behind it. Look, in the ashram, Srimnu is sitting and guiding mother, and she is doing all the work. Okay? So this is a clear example of the misinterpretation of the idea that women are inferior. They are not. Prakriti also is not inferior. At this level, there seems to be a difference of gradation of good and higher between knowledge and the work that you do. But it's a misinterpretation. At the highest level, they are equal to each other. Chit and Shakti become one at the highest level. That's in our Indian iconography, we have what we call the Ardhanarishwara. Half man, half woman at the highest level. They are together. That's the truth.
But isn't it also true that the woman in India was often respected as the goddess?
Yes, but practically it was not so.
Right.
Practically it was not so. Even today in the north and other places, okay. In fact, a very interesting detail came out during the COVID period. They found that the men going away for work are not going away for work anymore. They are restricted to the home. So there is always domestic quarrels increase like anything all over the world. So women are being given a bad treatment. So the truth is exactly something else altogether. Okay? So this is what Srimad is saying in the Gita. We should not misinterpret the Gita even when there is something local and temporal. There is a deeper truth behind it. That's what he's saying. We'll read the next para. So this is a big para, but he has told you what is the truth behind sacrifice, what is the truth behind the varnashram, what is the truth behind the shastras. Okay? Now, we'll read the next one. Okay. So, he is telling you here that we will not look at the temporal aspect, but we will only look at the spiritual aspect, the truth aspect. Nor shall we deal in any other spirit with the element of philosophical dogma or religious creed which either enters into the Gita or hangs about it, owing to its use of the philosophical terms and religious symbols current at that time. Okay? So, for instance, he is giving an example. When the Gita speaks of Sankhya and Yoga, we shall not discuss beyond the limits of what is just essential for our statement, the relations of the Sankhya of the Gita with its one Purusha and strong Vedantic coloring to the non-theistic or atheistic Sankhya that has come down to us, bringing with it its scheme of many Purushas and one Prakriti, nor of the Yoga of the Gita, many-sided, subtle, rich and flexible to the theistic doctrine, and the fixed, scientific, rigorously defined and graded system of the Yoga of Patanjali. In the Gita, the Sankhya and Yoga are evidently only two convergent parts of the same Vedantic truth, or rather two concurrent ways of approaching its realization. The one philosophical, intellectual, analytic, and the other intuitional, devotional, practical, ethical, synthetic, reaching knowledge through experience. The Gita recognizes no real difference in their teachings. Still less need we discuss the theories which regard the Gita as the fruit of some particular religious system or tradition. Its teaching is universal, whatever may have been its origins. So, this is the what he is saying. It's a very small para, but a lot of discussions of Sankhya, Yoga. What is Sankhya? What is Yoga? We have to look into detail. So, but this is what is also not understood in the world even today. Okay, for instance, yoga. Okay, yoga is something that everybody can do, but there are sections of people in the physical worlds, particularly the Abrahamic religions, we say that no, yoga is something Hindu. We won't touch it. That's not true at all. Yoga is something universal. Anyone can practice it. It has nothing to do with Hinduism. It may have originated in India, but it is something universal. And that the United Nations has recognized. That's a great credit to it. There is a International Yoga Day now. Okay, so Sarva is saying, precisely because of this truth, that there is eternal truths and their misapplication or limited applications in the physical world, we will not go into too many details where they are discussing only ideas and theories and all that. We will not put too much attention to it. We will only look at those truths in the Gita which are of universal application. That's what he's saying. Nor shall we deal in any other spirit with the element of philosophical dogma. There you are. All philosophies are dogmas, okay? If they insist too much on one aspect only. Or religious creed, which either enters into the Gita or hangs about it, owing to its use of the philosophical terms and religious symbols current at the time. The religious symbol is very clearly the yajna, okay? So, which is not practiced elsewhere. In India it was very common. So, that's what he's saying. So, we will approach and apply. We will not pay too much attention to those things. Even in the Gita, he has sometimes sort of sidelined some of the things. Okay, when we come to that, we will see.
And he says, hangs about it.
Yeah, that's right. Very interesting. So he's saying, hangs about it. Okay, so suggestions. Okay, so hangs about it, owing to its use of philosophical terms and religious symbols current at the time. When the Gita speaks of Sankhya and Yoga, we shall not discuss beyond the limits of what is essential to our statement. So, I'll finish the sentence, then we come back to what he's saying. We shall not discuss beyond the limits of what is just essential for our statement, the relations of the Sankhya of the Gita with its one Purusha and strong Vedantic coloring to the non-theistic or atheistic Sankhya that has come down to us, bringing with it its scheme of many Purushas and one Prakriti, nor the Yoga of the Gita, many-sided, subtle, rich and flexible to the theistic doctrines and the fixed, scientific, rigorously defined and graded system of the Yoga of Patanjali. So, what is the usual Sankhya theory is, there are 3 or 4 basic concepts there that you have to go through knowledge and you have to go through separating of Purusha and Prakriti. It is, you realize the impersonal aspect of the divine. That's the usual idea of the Sankhya. And yoga usually understood is the Patanjali's yoga, the Raj Yoga. That's usually understood. But in the Gita, he is deviating from the concept of Sankhya, how we will see, and he is also giving the word yoga he is using, but he means karma yoga. And karma yoga is not jnana yoga. Patanjali's yoga is jnana yoga. But in the Gita, when they speak of yoga, they mean the karma yoga. So that's what Sundar is pointing out here. Okay? So, not discuss beyond the limits of what is essential for our statement, the relations of the Sankhya of the Gita. The Sankhya of the Gita is separate from the traditional Sankhya, okay? With its one Purusha and strong Vedantic coloring of the non-theistic or atheistic Sankhya. Sankhya philosophy is atheistic. It speaks only of the impersonal aspect of the divine, okay? But in the Gita, it says there is, they go to the Vedantic concept. Okay? All Purushas. See what he's saying? The Gita, the Sankhya is saying there is one Prakriti, nature is one, but the Purushas are many. Is that true? There is a certain element of truth in that, because your consciousness, and my consciousness are all different. Suppose you have realized the self. Have I realized the self? No. So there are many Purushas. So the Sankhya is applicable at the lower levels of the spiritual planes of consciousness. But the higher you rise, you see that everybody's self is one. It's part of the one self of the divine. Your soul, my soul are essentially the same, and they all are coming from the one over soul. So there is a difference at which level you are. So Sankhya is applicable and true at the lower levels, and Vedanta is applicable and true at the highest levels. But they seem to be contradictory. One is saying there's only one Purusha, the other is saying no, there are many Purushas. So that's why Sripta is saying we won't go into too many details of all that. We'll just take the essence of what they are saying and we'll proceed. Okay? So this is what the Sankhya is saying, that there is one nature, universal nature, and the Purushas are many. But the Advaita is saying exactly the opposite. Advaita is saying there's only one Purusha. Okay? So there is a difference. Sripta is pointing out that. Okay? So, and then also there is another one. In the Sankhya, it's an atheistic philosophy. Because it leads to the impersonal knowledge aspect. Okay? But
atheistic here means what?
You don't believe in the personal divine.
Okay.
In that sense.
But you can believe in the infinite divine.
Yeah, there is no personality to the divine.
Right.
When you go to the higher mind level, you are in a state of knowledge. You are in a state of peace. You are in a state of power. You are in a state of bliss. But nobody is there. That's the impersonal aspect of the divine. And there are many philosophies which agree with that. Buddhism, okay, Jainism, they all say there is no, even Islam, God has no form. There is no form. We'll finish that Sankhya and Yoga and what Sripta is saying.
Yeah.
We'll finish that. Basically, Sankhya, as I told you, is the classical Sankhya is Purusha and Prakriti and impersonal aspect of the divine, and many Purushas and one. But in the Gita, it's not like that. The Gita is Advaitic. Gita is Vedanta. It says there's only one Purusha. Appearing to be different. Appearing to be different. But the self in you, self in him and self in me is the same. Otherwise, in the cosmic consciousness, how will I know that I am one with everybody else? Okay? At the lowest level, the bodies are different. At the highest level, essentially the consciousness is the same everywhere. So, that is what we have to understand. Then the yoga, as he said, yoga of Patanjali is different. Okay? That's the Jnana Yoga. But in the Gita, when they speak of yoga, they mean Karma Yoga. Working at the physical level, not rejecting it. And the last one is, Gita recognizes no real difference in their teachings. Normally, Sankhya and Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga, are different. Patanjali's Yoga, you know, the Raj Yoga, the 8 steps of Raj Yoga, na? Yama, Niyama, Asanas, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Very, very fixed system, very scientific and very, very logical. You have to go step by step and get to the experience of the Brahman. So that is different from Karma Yoga. Okay? So that's what he's saying. The Gita recognizes no real difference in their teachings. Both are true at different levels. Still less need we discuss the theories which regard the Gita as the fruit of some particular religious system or tradition. Because the Gita is there in the Mahabharata. Okay, that's he has told you that most of the religions start from a particular person. Christianity starts from Christ. Islam starts from Muhammad. Okay? Buddhism starts from Buddha, but the Vedanta doesn't start from anybody, and the Gita also starts from nobody. It's an episode in the Mahabharata. So that's what he's saying. Its teaching is universal, whatever may have been its origins. Its origins are Vedantic, but its teaching is universal. Sanatana Dharma.
Thank you, Ranganath. Namaste.
Okay.
Namaste all. Namaste.